Hello, my name is Linda Hebert Sekiguchi. It is Tuesday, June 20th in the year 2000, and behind the camera is Bruce E. Michener. We're here in the lovely home of Mary. Tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Muehring.
Muehring. Okay, I'm sorry. Mary Muehring here in San Jose, California. And thank you for having us come to your home, Mary.
I'm so glad to have you here. It's a wonderful treat for me.
Great. Well, Mary has been with Department of Defense schools overseas, and we're going to first ask her about some of her previous life, previous to Department of Defense schools, and then about her Department of Defense schools career. So, Mary, can you tell us a little bit about your growing up years, your elementary, high school, and so on?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I was born in Missouri. You know where Missouri is.
Right in the middle.
I grew up on a farm about 2 miles south of Hannibal, Missouri. You ever heard of Hannibal? It's the boyhood home of Mark Twain, the famous writer, so most people know about Hannibal. So I received my education in that area. And as I say, I grew up on a farm. I graduated from Hannibal High School, and then I went 2 years to Hannibal LaGrange College, which was a 2-year college. Then I got my AB degree from Culver Stockton College, which is just north of Hannibal. And then later I got my Master's of Education from the University of Missouri at Columbia, Missouri. So all of my education was in Missouri, in that area. And then when I started teaching in the Hannibal area. And I taught about 10 years in the Hannibal area in elementary grades. I started in the high school, excuse me, but I went into elementary grades, and I'm glad I did. I never did go back in high school because I loved the middle grades, teaching in elementary grades so much better. So I stayed with elementary grades. And then after 10 years in the Hannibal area, I went to suburban St. Louis and taught about 10 years there. So I had about 20 years teaching in Missouri.
I see. Great.
And during that time, I suppose when you grow up on a farm, you live sort of an isolated life. And I've always dreamed of travel, overseas. And so I accidentally ran across this advertisement in one of the educational magazines about the overseas schools were wanting teachers, qualified teachers, to teach overseas on military bases, American boys and girls. And I thought, oh, that's the answer to my prayer. If I could teach overseas.
Get you out of there.
Yes, give me a chance to travel and see the world. And so I applied. I had no idea whether I had any chance or not, because their standards were very high, I found out. You had to have at least a bachelor's degree and successful teaching experience. You couldn't just say, well, I've taught a couple of years.
Right.
And you had to have your supervisors or principal or superintendent to back you up with letters of recommendation in order to get the job. So I applied, and let's see, the last thing I had to do was to get a personal interview with the recruiter overseas. And then after I had the personal interview, of course they didn't know whether I would get the job or not, but that was the final thing I had to do. Then I had to just sit and wait.
Now, was this a person from the Washington, D.C. office then?
Yes, this was all under the Washington, D.C. office, yes. And the personal interview with the recruiter I knew was very important, because later I became a recruiter myself, and I know how important that is, because you may have all of these academic qualifications, but they want people, I guess, with certain personality to be able to adjust, because at first those schools were not, the very best at the time, because they started from scratch. And then they gradually developed and developed. Of course, when I applied, the schools, I applied about 10 years after the war, and the schools, were started immediately after the war. So by the time I got into it, the schools were well established and were just wonderful schools, far superior to anything I had taught in the U.S.
Now, Mary, before we go too far, let's just establish where you were when, if you can tell us which years you were in what locations overseas, and then we'll go into a little more detail
sure.
about your experience.
When I was accepted, they sent me to Europe, and I was in Europe 4 years. And then...
That was which years? From
oh, I see. In 1954, I was assigned to Europe, and I was in Würzburg 2 years, and then I asked for transfer to Berlin. I always wanted to get to Berlin, and they granted my transfer, and I was in Berlin 2 years. And then I had to go back to the States because I was on sabbatical leave from the school there in suburban St. Louis, and Brentwood was the name of the school. I had to go back for 1 year because I was on sabbatical leave. And so I went back for that 1 year, but I knew I wasn't going to stay. So I went back into overseas schools, and this time I asked if I could work in Far East because I had seen some of Europe, and I loved Europe. But I said I ought to see maybe some of the Far East and then come back to Europe was what I had in mind. So then they assigned me to the Far East. I stayed there 15 years.
My word.
And then I retired in 1974. And,
now, which schools were you and what years?
Beg pardon?
Which years and what schools were you in the Far East?
Oh, I was assigned to Sukaran Elementary School, which was military base there in Okinawa. See, Okinawa was part of Japan, or the island of Japan. And at that time, the U.S. had complete control of Okinawa. And they had, I don't know, they had so many bases there after the war. And they kept that built up, I guess, just for future security. And so I was assigned to Sukaran Elementary as a teacher. And then they were in desperate need of administrators. And I really was not interested in administration at all. I loved to teach. But since I had my master's degree, they talked me into trying it out. So I became an assistant principal then at Sukaran. And at first I didn't like it at all. But then after I got adjusted to it, and it was a tremendous responsibility because this school had 1,000 to 1,200 pupils.
Wow.
And that was quite a school to be able to have to manage. But I had a very good, I guess you'd call it a mentor, the principal. He taught me as an assistant to run every phase of the school, just every phase of it. He didn't miss any of it.
Right.
In fact, by the end of the second or third year, I think I was running the school.
Wow.
He used to come in about middle of the afternoon and say, Mary, I've got a headache coming on. I think I better go home and rest, lie down. Carry on, Mary. And he knew I would because I was already running the school. But he was excellent, though. He taught me everything about the school. So at the end of the 3 years, he retired and then made me a full-time principal, and I stayed there then. It was a total of 15 years.
Wow. Very good. Well, let's go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, let's back up then and go back to Europe, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Yes, anything in particular, or?
Well, you said that you were teaching in Würzburg, and I think you did some interesting things there.
Oh yes, that was, I had heard about Würzburg, but I didn't know too much about it, and I found out that Würzburg had a 700-year-old castle, and you know, historic things like that were very, very interesting. And the interesting thing about Würzburg was that during the war, there was one bombing raid. They said it only lasted 22 minutes. It destroyed 75% of that city. Wow. And when I was there, which was 10 years after the war, still some of those ruins, you could still see them. They hadn't had time to clear them away because 75% of the city had been destroyed. But that was a wonderful base to teach on, because there's so many interesting things there to help you in your teaching. I took the children on trips, and we took, that was one thing I liked about the overseas schools, is that they encourage you to take trips and see the surrounding country with the pupils. Right. They said there's no point in these boys and girls, American boys and girls, just sitting there on the military base. Right. They should get out and see the countryside and the country where they are living
So
and
tell
make
me about
exchanges with the schools.
Oh, yeah. So tell
And
us
we
about
did
some of
that.
those. Mhm.
Yes. And so I would take my children on all kinds of trips there in Germany. And that was one thing, they always furnished a bus. If you wanted to go somewhere, no problem, give you a bus and here we go. We went through a German brewery to see how they made beer. We went through a winery. We visited on the farms to see how they grew their crops.
Mm.
And then I guess the best trip we had, I took the kids, we rented a boat, a river boat,
Oh.
and went down the Main River is where Würzburg is located, and it's a tributary to the Rhine. And so we got the boat there. We had the whole boat, just a small boat. And I took my class, and we had some parents go along to help, and German teachers to go along. And so then we took a trip down the Main, and then down the Rhine, all the way almost to the end of the Rhine River. And they would explain the things that we'd see along the way, you know, and there would be the vineyards growing on the side of the mountains, and they'd explain that. And then for lunch, the boat docked, and the men there built a bonfire, and we had roasted wieners. That was the kids' lunch, you know. So it was really an interesting trip. But then the other thing, we exchanged classes with the German schools, and that was interesting. We had them come to our school and take part in as many activities as they could. Of course, they didn't know English too well, but we helped them along. They had lunch in our cafeteria, which had sports together. And then we went to their school and exchanged visits with them. And one thing I always thought was interesting, I always taught my children to square dance. And one time we invited a German class to come over to square, and we taught them how to square dance. And the German children just loved it. So told their teacher, why can't we have square dancing in our school? The teacher said, well, you can. Let's invite them over to teach you. So we went over and took them, went over to teach them how to square dance. And we had our pictures in the local paper and all. So I said, well, we introduced square dancing into the German schools.
What fun.
I don't know if it lasted or not, but it was fun. And we enjoyed the exchange of the classes with the German schools. Now that was in Würzburg. And then Berlin was an entirely different situation. Did you want to hear about Berlin?
Please, that would be great.
Well, I don't know why Berlin was so enticing to me, but I guess because it had been Hitler's headquarters, you know, during the war. And that was where the war ended, you know, there in Berlin. Because Hitler, you know, had his underground headquarters there in Berlin. And it was 30 feet below under the ground where he had his headquarters there. And he hid out there until the end of the war. And they said that underground headquarters that he had was just, wonderfully furnished with every possible luxury or whatever he wanted, you know, was there. And then, of course, you know what happened at the end. He and his girlfriend, Eva Braun, committed suicide. And then their bodies were supposed to be burned outside the building there where the headquarters were. The headquarters was 30 feet below the ground.
Wow.
So, and when I was there, I got pictures of the rubble that was left. See, after 10 years, there was still rubble left there.
Wow.
From the time when the war ended. And I'm sure that's all gone now, but I have some pictures of that rubble that was left from Hitler's underground bunker. But I love Berlin. I think the reason I liked it so was the fact that it was 110 miles behind the Iron Curtain, and you never knew what was going to happen. You know, there's just the excitement of it. When you're young, you know you like that sort of thing. I wouldn't want it now.
Sure. Now, I understand you were there, of course, before the Berlin Wall went up.
There was no wall there, no. And you see, at that time, Berlin was divided. There was East Berlin, which the communists held. Then West Berlin was divided among the French, the English, and the Americans. And I was in the American sector. But then we had access to all of Berlin. We could easily go into East Berlin, too. And there was no restrictions, except they'd stop us at the border and show our passport and all. And but there was no restrictions, no wall or anything like that. And we loved to go over there because everything was just about half price. It was interesting.
Wow.
Everything was so cheap, and they had a lot of interesting things you could buy.
Like what?
Oh, you know, souvenirs of different kinds. We'd go over there, and then if you wanted to shop for things, if you wanted to buy dishes. In fact, when I left Berlin, the parents in my room, I guess they wanted to give me a going away present, and they brought me some beautiful china.
Wow.
It came from East Berlin, and I know that you probably paid twice as much for it if you'd gotten it in West Berlin. That was the difference in Deutsche Mark between East and West Berlin. And then there's so many exciting things happened. I remember I used to take my children on trips, and one morning I happened to have in my room the son of the fellow who was head of the embassy there in Berlin. He happened to be in my class, and so I took my children on a trip there in West Berlin. And so before I left, I got a call from the embassy, and they said, I understand you're taking your children on a trip to a certain area. And I said, yes. They said, well, now don't cancel the trip, but you be on the alert. There's some uprisings over in that area, so be on the alert. He didn't want me to cancel the trip, though. And I didn't tell the children anything about it, but we didn't have any trouble. They always sat with us when we went on a trip, a security guard.
Oh.
He always accompanied. In fact, I have a picture of the security guard, but he went on trips with us. And also, our school there in West Berlin was completely under the influence of security guard. He surrounded, or not surrounded, but paroled our school 24 hours a day.
Wow.
You know, I would be teaching there in the class. I think I had a 5th grade, and I look out the window, and there to see the security guard go by with a rifle over his shoulder. Made you think, gee, what kind of a place am I working?
Wow.
But they had a security guard there constantly, because they never knew, you know, what was going to happen, because it was isolated. See, there was, as I say, 110 miles between West Berlin and West Germany, and in between was the communist East Germany, and that area, you see, they had complete control over it. But to me, it was just an interesting place to teach. I guess I like the excitement of it.
Sure.
I think.
Sounds really interesting.
It was very, very interesting. At one time we thought we were going to be cut off. The East, the communists there threatened to cut us off from West Germany. You know, they had cut us off once before. And this time they threatened again, and we thought, gee, if we're going to be isolated, maybe we won't even survive. Then we found out that the government had stored at least 6 months of supplies of food and necessities, you know, in case we were cut off.
Wow.
But they got it worked out some way that we weren't cut off. But there for a while we thought, well, we might be cut off from West Germany. But it happened that we never did.
That would be something.
But that was such an interesting experience there in West Berlin. And I'll never forget that. Of course, I went back after I had left there, and then later I was on a trip. I was on a trip around the world with a friend of mine, and we stopped by West Berlin and just to see the wall. And of course, the wall had been put up, and we did go over there, but we had in order to get on the other side, you had to take a tour bus. But then later, of course, the wall came down.
Quite different.
Oh yes.
Now, while you were in Europe, I understand you did some traveling.
Oh yes, I traveled constantly. I traveled every holiday that we had, the weekends, or sometimes you'd have a 3-day holiday, or you'd have maybe a spring vacation or Christmas vacation. And I spent every day traveling. That was my goal, was to travel. And I didn't have any social life locally because I wanted to spend all that time traveling.
Right.
And I kept a daily diary of every place I visited. And because I knew that later, you know, I would write that up and put it into booklets. And so that's what I did. I kept this daily diary and all the historic places that we visited, and the people that we met, and the foods. You know, every country has different foods.
Right.
And I kept a daily diary of all of that. And that kept me busy. And when I left Europe, I had visited every country in Europe and in Western Europe it is, well, including Russia and the Mideast. I went through Egypt, and I got to visit during Christmas. I went to the Holy Land, went to Bethlehem, Christmas Eve. That was quite an experience. And then I went into Turkey, and then of course Egypt to me was the most fascinating country in the Far East, in the Mideast, not Far East. Yes. And see, the capital of Egypt at that time was Cairo. Yes. And I remember riding a camel from Cairo out to the Great Pyramid, which they claim took 100,000 slaves, 20 years to build that pyramid. Wow. Can you believe that? And of course the Sphinx, whatever that's supposed to represent. But I rode a camel out there to visit that. And then later I took a trip down the Nile River, all the way down to the Valley of the Kings. You probably have heard of the Valley of the Kings. Yes. This is where the ancient kings were buried, and they were buried with all their treasures and things that they had lived with, because they, according to their religious belief, they would need these in the next world. And so they buried all these treasures with these kings. And every one of their graves, they found out, had been broken into by thieves and robbers, because they knew it was there. They'd break in and get all these treasures. Right. Except there was one, and you probably remember hearing about King Tut. Yes. King Tutankhamun, I think they called him. He was just a young king, died fairly young. And when they found his tomb, it was the only one they had ever found up to that time that had not been broken into. Wow. And that's what made it unique. And they always wondered why they didn't break into it. And they found out that his tomb had been, was underneath another tomb. And another tomb had been built on top of it. I don't know how they ever did that. But that's the reason it had never been broken into, because nobody knew the tomb was there. So somebody figured it out, and they discovered it. And so then we got to, they set it up as a visitor's place. So I got to go down into his tomb. I think there were about 4 rooms. And in one room was where they had his body. Of course, it was a mummy, and they had, it was encased, I think there were two coffins of wood, and then the third coffin was solid gold. And they kept his mummy there. They said they thought probably because the atmosphere would be better to keep his body there than to put it in a museum somewhere. Now, I don't know if it's still there today or not. I would love to know. Surely today they could find a place to take care of that. I would think so. Then maybe they didn't know too much about preservation of mummies. But we got to go down into that tomb and see that mummy. And the interesting thing about that King Tut's tomb, I can remember, see, it was discovered in 1922. And I was just a young child then. But I could remember my mother and father talking about the discovery of this tomb. And of course, being a child, it didn't mean too much to me, but they were so excited over it. And I thought, gee, that's just interesting. And I thought, I never dreamed then, someday I'll go down into that tomb and see this. Can you imagine how things happen? But I distinctly remember 1922 when my mother and father were talking about discovering King Tut's tomb. That was really something. But that was Egypt. That, to me, was one of the most fascinating countries I ever visited, was Egypt at that time. And
very good. Well, I suppose we ought to move on to your Far East experience in Okinawa, and maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Well, yes, whatever you want me to. You know, one thing I would like to do before I go too far and I run out of time, if you don't mind, I would like to say one thing about the overseas schools.
Sure.
That they were so well funded by the Department of Defense. And see, I had taught in Missouri 20 years before I went overseas. I taught in some schools that were poor schools. They weren't too well funded. And then I taught in schools that were fairly well, rich neighborhoods, were well funded, but none of them compared to the schools I taught at overseas, because the Department of Defense had high standards, and they wanted to have the best schools possible. I guess one thing to show off foreign countries that we could have good schools. You wouldn't want them to think that we didn't have good schools.
Sure.
And they really poured money into it. And we had, I just couldn't get over how well everything was set up, and supplies and everything that you needed. I know when I was principal there on Okinawa, that anything that I needed that I could justify, I got it. There was no problem with money at all. And you couldn't do that in the States because they just didn't have the money. And nowadays I always get disgusted with these people who say, oh, schools don't need money, you pour money into it and this goes in some administrator's pocket. Well, that's true unless somebody is going to direct it. But money is what the schools need. Anybody who's taught school knows that.
Right.
Money is what they need, but it does have to be controlled and directed.
Right.
But that was one thing I wanted to say about the overseas schools. They were well funded, and we had the best schools of any I had ever taught in the States, far superior. In the supplies and the way they were set up. And then the other thing I wanted to say about the overseas schools, I think the boys and girls, American boys and girls who went to these overseas schools were very, very fortunate because they not only received, good education, they had good schools, but they also had the benefit of learning about other cultures and exchange visits with the children, in the other countries, so that when they grow up and become adults, I still say they will become, or will have been, the best citizens of the U.S. because they won't be narrow-minded, bigoted, when they're working with other people of foreign countries, because they will understand these cultures, and that there are many different religions and different cultures. And I think that's one of the main benefits of the overseas schools for the boys and girls. I think they'll make the best citizens when they become adults. I believe I read somewhere in some of these articles from the overseas schools, they get out, send out bulletins all the time, that they had educated, I think, over 3 million American boys and girls, at least 3 million. Now that's quite a few.
For sure.
And I would say that those boys and girls had the best benefits of education of all. Because see, some of them spent their whole school years overseas. Some of the parents just went from one base to another.
Right.
And some of them maybe just went for 1 or 2 years and then retired, I don't know. But some of them spent their whole lives in overseas school and they never went to school at all in the States. Never at all, never once.
Wow.
So to me, that was very interesting. The fact that the schools were well funded and the American boys and girls really benefited from that.
Right.
And then the third thing I'd like to say is the opportunity that the overseas schools gave me to really travel and see the world. I could never have done that in any other career. And since I was particularly interested in travel, it just fit my needs.
Certainly.
Because I could, well, and I hear people say now, here in the U.S. and say, well, now next year, my husband and I, we're going to go to Spain. And then maybe next year we'll go to England or maybe Russia or someplace like that. Once a year, I said, here I was able to do all that just in a few years because I lived right there. Right. See, it's a lot of difference when you live there because it doesn't cost so much to travel. And whereas if you have to make the trip from the U.S. to Europe or to the Far East, just think how much one trip costs.
Right.
And that to me, that was the most marvelous thing, was the fact that I had a career in which I could travel and see the world, and at the same time, that was earning a living.
Great. Can't
And
beat
I
that.
think it was marvelous, just a marvelous career.
Okay, so then let's talk a little more about your Okinawa school experience.
Well, on Okinawa, well, that was a unique experience. As I told you, I started out as a teacher, then I became the principal of the school. And but I still traveled everywhere that I could. And I traveled in every country in the Far East except China. The only country I couldn't get into at that time. They wouldn't allow tourists in. I think it was because they weren't prepared. They didn't have the hotels or restaurants or anything for tourists. They just couldn't take care of tourists. I can understand that. But now, of course, they love to have you because they're ready for tourists. But at that time, we tried to get into China, but we couldn't get in.
Okay.
But I did travel in all of the other countries, every one of them. Traveled into, of course, India, Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and then I got to travel to Australia. And that was, of course, a unique experience, was Australia. But, and every country was different, every country was unique. I don't know which one you'd want to hear about.
You choose.
Beg pardon?
You choose one you'd like to tell about, maybe.
Well, it's hard to choose because each one was unique. I suppose India was one of the most interesting. It was one of the poorest countries because it has a huge population, I guess about, one could say 400 million or something, huge population. India and China, I guess, is one that has the most largest population in the Far East. But you go to a place like Calcutta, and you just see hundreds and hundreds of people just on the streets begging.
Wow.
Just nothing at all. And then you see other places where the people were rich and well-to-do. There was such a contrast between the poor and the rich. But the unique thing to me I remember about India was seeing the Taj Mahal, which was in Agra, not too far from New Delhi, the capital. But Agra, Taj Mahal was considered the most beautiful building in the world, and I guess it was. I know I was thrilled to see it. And this Taj Mahal had been built, excuse me, by one of the kings there. And he had built it in memory of his wife. And she had died giving birth to his 14th child.
Wow.
And he wanted to build this beautiful palace in memory of her. And it was a solid white marble palace, is what it was. And inside there were, let's see, it covered about 42 acres. And inside I think there were 8 rooms. Excuse me. But the inside of it was all inlaid with all kinds of precious jewels and things like that. It was so well done. And let's see, how long did it take him to build it? I think it took about 20 years to have it built.
Wow.
After she died. And he said he wanted to have one built for himself, only in black marble. I don't know what that would look like. It would be a contrast, I guess, to white marble. But when he died, his sons, I guess they discarded the idea. They had him buried beside of her in her grave, there in the Taj Mahal, which to me makes sense, that he should have been buried beside of her.
Right.
But to me, that was the outstanding thing that I saw in India, was the Taj Mahal, considered the most beautiful building in the world.
Great. Beautiful.
And I don't know. Let's see. Because the Philippines, I love the Philippines. See, they were first taken over by the Spanish, and the Spanish brought the Catholic religion. That's right. And they said the Philippines was the only Christian religion in the Far East, because most of them were Buddhists or Muslims or Hindus. Of course, India was mostly Hindu. And then you had the Buddhists in Thailand, Thailand and many of the other countries there. And then in the Philippines, what I liked about them, we went up to the mountains to these Aborigines who had this beautiful carving. If you see some of the carvings that I have here, those two, then do I have the Madonna here? Yeah. Those were hand carved by those native people there. Beautiful carvings. And it's made out of mahogany, I think. It's supposed to be mahogany. And so that's what I enjoyed about the Philippines. And then, of course, there was Thailand, which is noted for the Buddhists. That's where they have all these huge Buddhist statues. That's very, very interesting. And then Cambodia was sort of interesting, because in Cambodia they had found a Buddhist, there were Buddhist monuments, and that had been buried in the jungles for, well, I think they said 500 years, and they finally dug out this, they called it the Angkor Wat Buddhist temple, is what it was. And that was very, very interesting to see there in Cambodia. And then while I was in Cambodia, I got to ride an elephant. I got to ride an elephant a couple of times in the Far East. I got to ride a camel and an elephant, which I would never have ridden any other place.
What's that?
A camel in Egypt and an elephant in India and Cambodia. And then, of course, Thailand. I mentioned Thailand, but then let's see, Malaysia. That was where we went through the jungles and saw the rubber plantations. And to me, that was very interesting, just to take this ride through the jungles and see the rubber plantations. And then, see, from Malaysia, went to Indonesia, and there they'd been having, I think they overthrew the ruler there, and they were having all kinds of trouble. We stayed one night there. We didn't stay very long. What I liked about Indonesia was Bali, the island of Bali, and we stayed in this hotel called Bali Beach Hotel, and I just loved it. It was such a beautiful hotel. It was run by an Englishman, and well, yeah, this is a place where they had these signs all around, no tipping, for the people who worked in the hotel, and. You would think if there's no tipping, you wouldn't get good service. And it was the best service I ever had, any hotel I ever stayed.
Wow. It
was the best service I ever had, but they had these signs around, you weren't allowed to tip anybody.
Wow.
And I thought that was unique.
Sure.
In fact, the hotel was run by an Englishman, and I said, I'd like to write to your headquarters. So he gave me the headquarters in New York. And I wrote him a letter, and I said, of all the places I've stayed around the world, I've never stayed in a hotel before where there was no tipping and the best service I ever had.
Right.
But I just felt I had to say something that was so unique. Sure. And I loved that place. It was such a beautiful place. And we were there during Christmas vacation. And I remember they played Silent Night in one of their rooms there where they had a dining room, and they had the bar and the service and all. They played Silent Night in German. And then another time we were in this place where we were eating, and see, I don't remember what night it was, but they played I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And I couldn't believe it. Here I was 10,000 miles from San Francisco, and here they were playing one of my favorite songs, I Left My Heart in San Francisco.
That's great.
But I think they were catering, of course, to tourists.
Sure.
Is what they were doing. But I'll never forget Valley Beach. It was such a lovely place. So nice. And then, of course, Australia, that was a unique continent. That, of course, I loved the Australian people. They were so friendly. They went out of their ways to be friendly to you. And I remember meeting this lady on the street. I was walking down to catch a bus, and she says, "Oh, we loved you Americans because you saved us from the Japanese, They just, and I understood that Japan almost had gotten to Australia, was about ready to take it over when we came in and stopped the war.
Wow.
But Australia was so unique. The British accent. Because they spoke English, you understood it, but it was the British accent. And then when I was in Sydney, I wanted to visit a school. Sydney is the largest city there. It's a huge city. And so I called the superintendent and said I was visiting there from America, and could I visit the school? Oh yes, they'd be glad to have me. And so he told me how to get there on the bus. And so when I got there, the principal of the school invited me in for a cup of tea. They said they drink tea 2 or 3 times a day. So the country's run on tea. And they do make delicious tea. Have you ever drunk any English tea?
Yes, I have had it before, and it's good.
I remember having it when I was in Europe. I don't know why, it just seemed like to me that the way they make their tea, it just tastes better. Because I know even when I was on an English plane, was taking a trip there, that they served tea, and it's just better than any tea I've never been able to make.
I also like the Indian tea.
You like what?
The Indian
The Indian
tea,
tea, do you? I don't know why, I just thought the English, they just really knew how to make tea.
A lot of experience.
There's something about it, the way they prepare it, I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't think it's just the tea flavor, but it's something the way they prepare it that it's different.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got there, he asked me what grade I wanted to visit, and I said, well, I'd been teaching 5th grade and somewhere in that area, and so he sent me to a 5th grade class. It was a boys' class. They had the boys and girls separated. They didn't have them together like we do now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they still have that system or not. But he sent me to a boys' class,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a man teacher, of course. And I wanted to just go in and observe. He said, no, I want you to come in front of the room and talk with the pupils and let them ask you questions about America. I said, well, if that's what you want, well, so that's what I did.
Okay.
And the thing that interested me, though, was the fact that the only questions they asked me about was the Indians and cowboys. That seemed to be the only thing they knew. I just wondered what they studied in history.
Right.
I told them, I said, I don't know anything about the Indians and cowboys, because where I grew up, there weren't any. I only know what I've read about and what I see in the movies. I think they must have been taking that from the movies. And most of the movies at that time were about cowboys.
Sure.
And the Wild West, you know, and the Indians, which is not really a true picture, but it was something. But that was so interesting. And then, of course, I remember the teacher asked one boy, how can you tell this lady's from America? Well, I could tell by her accent. And I hadn't thought of before that I had an accent to them and they had an accent to me, you know.
Sure.
We both had accents that were just a little bit different, although we spoke the same language. I always thought that was interesting too. But Australia was very, very interesting. I never did get into the back country, that is in the central part.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the towns or people live around the southern border of the continent. But I just didn't have time to do as much traveling as I would like to have. But I did get to see a lot of Australia.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Now, getting back to your schools in Okinawa, tell us about some things that you did there in the school.
Well, I suppose not anything too different than you would any other place.
Mm-hmm.
It's we did have some exchange with the local schools.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think as much so as I did in Germany, because the local schools, of course, they were taught Japanese in their schools, and we'd had them over for sports. Sometimes we'd have sport activities, and they'd come over, and then they'd have lunch in our cafeteria, and we trying to think of some of the things we did there.
Now, you said you had a pilot program of some sort that you
Oh yes, I
started
forgot.
there.
I think I mentioned that before. This IGE was an individually guided education program. Yes. Now that was started in my school in 1970 to 71, and this was a unique program. It had already been worked out and tested around Wisconsin and Michigan and in that area, and it involved team teaching and non-graded rooms. And what they did in my school, when they decided they would experiment and see how it would be in an overseas schools, we had three rooms, say, and they were all maybe, say, grades 2 and 3, and they knocked out the partitions between the two rooms, so it was one huge room. Then they started from scratch and did away with all the grades, and then the children were tested, and then they were put into groups according to how they came out on the test. Now some of them would be very good in reading, maybe not good in math. Now in math you might have some 5th graders, and there was some 3rd graders. You might have some 3rd graders real good in math. They were just as good as the 5th, so they'd be in the same group. That's the reason they call it non-graded. And then same way with reading and the other skills. And then they would be retested from time to time, and they would move from group to group according to their ability and how much they progressed. It was a fascinating program. But I happened to be very lucky to have a group of teachers that were very professional and hardworking. And they worked as a team. Say there would be 3 teachers would have grades, say grades 2 and 3. Say there were 3 rooms, and there would be 3 teachers. Instead of one teacher just keeping the same group all the time, the 3 teachers worked as a team, and they divided them up among the 3 teachers. And each teacher would have maybe a specialty. Maybe one teacher was especially good in math. Well, she would take over all the math classes. Maybe another teacher was especially good in reading. And it was quite a unique program. I was amazed how well these teachers were able to go along with the program. And they sent Dr. Romano, who was a professor from Michigan State University. He had been starting those all over the U.S. there, especially in that area around Michigan and Wisconsin. And they sent him out there to initiate the program. And he spent about, I guess it was 3 weeks getting the teachers started on the program. What they did, we dismissed school at noon. And then all the afternoon was spent on this program. And the parents went along with it. They didn't seem to mind the fact that they were dismissed at noon. We saw that they had their lunch. The cafeteria had their lunch. And then the afternoon was spent on this program. And he got it started. And see, I had it, I started in 79, I retired in 74. I had it 4 years. And it proved to be a great success, and the parents liked it. We got a nice recommendation from the Department of Defense. They thought it was a success too. And but it took a lot of organization. I can see. I think after I left, I don't think that the administrators carried it on too much because it took a lot of organization, and I don't think a lot of them even wanted to be bothered with it. But it was a wonderful program. Wonderful program.
Great. Now, anything about the Japanese culture, things that you did there?
Well, let's see. As far as the Japanese culture is concerned, of course, every child in school had a culture class. That was what was interesting. Now, in Germany, we had a German teacher for every class from the kindergarten through. They all had a chance to learn a little bit of the German language. But in Okinawa, it was, they were taught not only the Japanese language, but also the culture. I had a picture where the culture teacher would have the children all sitting on the floor eating with chopsticks, you know, and they were learning the Japanese way of, their way of eating, and that was very interesting, because I gave them acquaintance with the Japanese culture. And then we would have, they had one, it was a boys' day, and for the Japanese Boys' Day, they would fly a flag, and they would have they said to parents in Japan, they would have a fish flying out, and then have one for each boy in the home. And so we used to fly those flags there on the Boys' Day, and we had special activities for the boys. Then there was Girls' Day, and the Girls' Day was so beautiful because we had all the children, even the teachers, come to school in their beautiful Japanese kimonos. Oh, that was beautiful. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And we had them, they would lined up and went to the auditorium where we had some programs, and they had Japanese dances. Oh, those Japanese dances were so beautiful, just so beautiful. Just because they had these beautiful costumes, you know, and it was just wonderful, the Japanese culture, when you think about how beautiful it was. And on Japanese Day, we celebrated one day, and when it was Boys' Day, I guess it was, all the children, all the girls would come in their little Japanese kimonos that they had, their parents furnished them from home, and all the teachers wore their Japanese costume, and I even wore mine in the office. You know, I was principal in the school there, and I will always remember, well, it was hard to get into that Japanese dress. I had to have my Japanese secretary to help me get into it. It was hard. But then, I'll never forget that day I went into the cafeteria and in my Japanese costume, and the kids had never seen their principal in a Japanese costume before. When I walked in, you know, the boys looked, "Oh, Miss Muehring, you look beautiful." I said, they never said that before. But it was a costume, you know, those Japanese costumes were so beautiful. And of course, all the teachers had them, and all the girls. I said, I don't know what the boys were. The boys didn't have anything special that time, like I can remember. But I just remember the girls having these beautiful Japanese dresses that they wore. It was so colorful. But they had a lot of exposure to Japanese culture because they all had Japanese culture classes. And that's something they will never forget.
Great. Well, Mary, I think we're going to be coming to a conclusion here, but is there anything else that you would like to tell us about before we...
Big pardon, I didn't know what...
Is there anything else you would like to tell us about before we draw things to a close here?
I think we've covered almost everything.
Yes.
I did want to bring out, I've already brought that out, about how well funded the overseas schools were.
Yes.
And how the American boys and girls benefited very much from those overseas schools, from their education, learning about cultures, other cultures. And the fact that I benefited so much because I had a chance to travel, which I could never have had a career like that in anything else that I know of. No, it was a wonderful experience. Wonderful
So you had 20 years, 54 to 74.
Yes, yes. Right.
Great.
And I couldn't have asked for a greater career because I was interested in traveling, you see. That's the reason that it meant so much to me.
Sure.
And of course I never took time to settle down and raise a family. I didn't have time.
And so since 1974, you've been here in San Jose.
Yes, and then I retired here in San Jose, and I right in this same house. When I bought this house, it wasn't even built yet. It was just on the drawing board. But they were building up these townhomes then. They had just gotten it started. And the reason I got here was my brother lived here. And he was the one who told me about it, and I told him I was going to retire. And I said I didn't want to retire in Missouri, where I grew up, because of the terrific winters there. I said it gets 20 below zero, and the snow gets 3 feet deep. And I don't think I can go back to that, because you see, Okinawa was summer all the time.
Right.
I had the air conditioner going day and night, winter and summer. You never turned the air conditioner on, never. Because it was that warm all the time in Okinawa. So when you get used to that, then it's much harder to come back to like the winters and temperatures that we had here. But California was, I guess, about the best place to retire because of the climate here. I love the climate here. It's never too warm and it's never too cold. You know, sort of in between. And I don't know of a better place for as climate is concerned than here in San Jose, this area. One thing we see, we're surrounded by mountains, or I guess they're really hills. And we're in the Santa Clara Valley, which you understand. That protects us from the fog and wet, damp weather from the coast. See, where we have the mountains in between us, and then we're protected from that hot weather in the valley there. And it's just, Santa Clara Valley just seems to be a perfect place as far as climate is concerned.
And now, what sort of involvements have you had since you've lived here?
What kind of involvement?
And what sorts of things have you been up to? What have you been doing?
You know, I think I spent most of my time writing up my trips. Because I just had them, you know, well, I had them typewritten, but when I came here, I decided to put them all into booklets. Every country had a separate one. And I had Europe, I forgot now how many countries I had in there. And then the Far East. I got all those booklets put together, and I also made one on the IGE, Individual Guided Education Program. And all those have been donated to the archives of the overseas schools.
Wonderful.
And Dr. Drysdale, he was very glad to get those, he said. And so that's what I've done with. I spent I don't know how many years getting that together. That took quite a while.
Dedication.
And well, yeah, and it was something that I happened to be interested in. And And so since then, I haven't done too much, except I try to go to the overseas reunions.
Of course.
I didn't get started in those until the last, let's see, I guess I've gone the last 6 of them. At first I wasn't very much interested in them, then I finally, after I once started, I got very interested in going back. Because you get to see people you know that you knew, and they always had something interesting going on. So I hope I can make the one in Boston. I'm planning to make the one in Boston. I hope I can.
All right.
And then next year it's going to be in Wichita, I understand.
Right.
I think that's great that they have a permanent headquarters now.
Right.
And it makes you feel good that they do have a permanent place, whereas before, you know, it was just from one place to another.
Some excellent planning there.
Oh, yes, and I think Dr. Drysdale had a lot to do with it.
For sure.
I'm sure he did.
Well, Mary, it's been really good talking with you, and thank you so much.
Well, I enjoyed talking about it because I know you understand and appreciate what it was like. Let's see, where was it now you taught?
I taught both in Germany and the Philippines.
Germany and the Philippines, yeah. So you knew what the Philippines was like then.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yes.
And whereabouts in Germany?
Both in Mannheim and in Frankfurt.
Oh, yeah, Frankfurt and Mannheim, yeah. Yeah. Didn't you like Germany?
It was really, really nice to be there, and like you said, having the opportunity to travel around, being right there, and you could drive off to England or Amsterdam or France or Switzerland for the weekend, so it was great.
Yes. Well, see, I had a teacher friend that had a car. She had an American car shipped over there, I think that's what she did. And she would take several of us with her, we'd go around and help expensive. And we traveled a lot by car. Sure. And then, of course, I took a lot of tours, too. But by going by car, you see, it's not too expensive, and you control your time, go where you want to go.
Yeah, and it was neat to be able to go out for the weekends, for example. You know, just go off to a little pension or simmer fry or that sort of thing.
And, oh yeah, but I forgot to mention my interesting trip to Russia. Of course, I wanted to visit there before I left. And so we got to visit inside the Kremlin. And that I'll never forget because I got to see Stalin and Lenin's tomb inside the Kremlin. And of course, they had the casket open, just to their waist. And you could see both of them, they were covered with glass. You could see both of them lying there. They just looked like they were asleep. And to me, that was a big thrill. And since then, of course, they've taken Stalin out. You know, Khrushchev did that because he wanted to get rid of everything that pertained to Stalin. And he left Lenin in there, but Stalin was taken out and buried somewhere outside the Kremlin. And I still wonder if Lenin is still in there. I've never heard. I don't know how I'd find out.
I'm not positive.
If he's still there or not. Because when we were there, we were on a tour, and the line looked like about a mile long with people lined up to go through this Kremlin to see Stalin and Stalin and Lenin. And so we got through ahead of time because we were with this tour, which was very good. But I enjoyed Russia. In fact, I don't know whether I told you about that before or not. They told me that if I wanted to teach in Russia, I could get a job there in the American embassy, you know, to teach. And the fellow who told me that was the one there in Berlin, who was head of the embassy, and his son, I told you, was in my class. And so one day he called me over. He said, "Oh, Mary, I want you to come over and meet somebody." So I went over to his house. And there was a fellow there who was from the Berlin embassy. And at that time, I was planning a trip to Russia. And he says, "Listen, if you would like a job teaching over there in the embassy with American boys and girls," he gave me the name of the superintendent to see, so maybe we'd get you a job. But of course, at the time, I thought, gee, that would be interesting, wouldn't it, to teach in Russia? And so he said, "Look me up when you get there." So, and the other thing he told me, he says, on your trip through Russia, would you please keep notes of everything you see and everything that happens and give me a copy? You know, that made me suspicious. I thought, ooh, he's asking me to be a spy. Really? I was very suspicious, but I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, when I got there, I wanted to see him, and he was out of town. And I didn't get to see him, but I did go and talk to the superintendent about a job there. And he didn't talk like, he didn't talk like I had much chance of getting a job there. And so I thought, well, it doesn't matter. But before I left, in the embassy, I got to talk to some of the Americans who were working in the Russian embassy. And I told them about all the things I had seen in Moscow. I got to go to the Russian ballet. Oh, that was out of this world, that beautiful ballet. And other places I had been. Went to the university there where they had both girls and boys and fellows in this university. And there were so many interesting things there in the city to see besides the Kremlin. And when I talked to this one girl I remember talking to in the American Embassy, she worked in there. She said, well, listen, you've seen more in a couple of days you've been here than we've seen in a year. She said it was very, very hard for them to get out of the embassy and go see it. They had to get special permission. Wow. Said even to go to the ballet, they couldn't just say, I want to go to the ballet. They had to apply. And you know that immediately they turned me off. I said, well, I wouldn't want a job here. Because that's the only reason I don't want to go, so I can mix with the people. Right. What else would I want to teach over there? And so that killed that. I said, no, I don't want a job there. But here's the interesting thing that happened from that. This fella who wanted me to give him a detailed account of everything, you know, I said, sounds like he wants me to be a spy. I had that feeling. But he was out of town, and I didn't get to see him, and I didn't make another effort to see him. But do you know, when I got back home, I came back home to St. Louis, and I picked up the St. Louis paper. That was 2-3 months, maybe 4 or 5 months after that. I had come back home. And on the front page, you won't believe this, was this fellow who was trying to entice me to teach there. He had been kicked out of Russia as a spy. He was a spy. And he was, and I said, here he was trying to get me to spy. I thought how lucky I was, because he'd been kicked out as a spy, and I recognized his name. Wow. And I got to thinking, what if I had taken him up on that? I might have got involved. I might have been kicked out myself, or he might have maybe got into some kind of trouble, and he could have blamed it on me, said she was the cause of it. And I got to think of all the things that could have happened if I'd taken up with that guy. For sure. Oh my goodness, that was really a shock when I read that. For sure. Well, again, Mary, this has been really interesting and very. Well, you've had some unique experiences. Big word? I didn't understand. You've had some unique experiences. Oh yes, I feel I've been very, very fortunate. Yes. Of course, all I have left now are memories, reminisce, and it's nice to be able to talk to somebody who wants to listen. Sure. Well, thank you very much. Well, I enjoyed it very much, talking about my trips and travels. But I really appreciate the opportunity that I had. I would never have dreamed I'd ever have this opportunity to travel like I did. But of course, I had to sacrifice family and all of that. But you can't have everything. Sure. Well, Dee, it was so nice to know you and to meet you, and I hope I'll meet you at the Boston reunion. Should be able to do that. Yeah, you're planning to go, I guess. For sure. Yeah, I hope